All right, today we're going to try and make sense of a really confusing, high-stakes series of events that unfolded between the United States and Iran. It's quite a story. You've got a military ultimatum, then a sudden announcement of a peace deal, followed by an immediate, and I mean forceful, denial. And this all played out for everyone to see. So, where do we even begin with all this? Here's the plan. We'll start with the ultimatum that really kicked everything off. Then we'll look at Iran's side of the story, which is, well, completely different. After that, we'll explore a really interesting theory about what might have actually been going on behind the scenes. We'll also break down a key press conference and then wrap it all up with the pretty unsettling questions this whole situation leaves us with. Okay, first up, the ultimatum and the claim. So how did this all begin? Well, it started with a very direct, very time-sensitive threat. So former President Trump put out this 48-hour ultimatum. The message was clear: get out of the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on your energy infrastructure. I mean, this pushed the two nations right to the brink of a major military conflict. And with the clock just hours from running out, the story took a very, very sharp turn. Just as tensions were hitting a boiling point, Trump didn't announce an attack. Instead, he announced a diplomatic breakthrough. He claimed that very good and productive conversations had happened and that he was hitting pause on any military strikes for a 5-day period. But the reaction from Iran was immediate. And let's just say it presented a completely different version of reality. The contradiction here couldn't be more stark. Literally within minutes of Trump's post, Iranian state media came out with a statement saying no contact of any kind, direct or indirect, had occurred. There was absolutely no middle ground between these two positions. And Iran's state media didn't just deny it, they laid out these 5 specific points. They didn't just say no talks happened, they gave their own interpretation, basically framing Trump's announcement as a retreat and even calling it psychological warfare. This quote from editor Ron Filipovsky really captures the level of skepticism that bubbled up right away. He wrote, "Never in my life have I believed Iran's state media over our own government until now. That's not being unpatriotic, it's having a brain that functions." Okay, so this brings up a massive question, right? If there were no talks, what was the whole point of announcing a deal in the first place? Well, one compelling theory is that it all came down to the economy. It seems a key driver here might have been pure panic over the financial markets. On the morning of this announcement, markets were getting really shaky. There were predictions that an actual war could send the price of oil skyrocketing towards $150 a barrel. And according to this theory, that 5-day timeline for the supposed deal wasn't random at all. The thinking goes that it was specifically structured to last exactly as long as the trading week. Stabilize the markets until they close on Friday, and then you could potentially ramp things back up over the weekend without that immediate financial blowback. Now, even with Iran's flat-out denial, the story was far from over. Out on an airport tarmac, former President Trump got hit with questions from reporters about his claim. And he was immediately confronted with the central problem. Iran was on the record, in public, calling his statement a lie. His response, he basically brushed it off as a PR problem for Iran. Then he doubled down, insisting very strong talks did happen. And for the very first time, he named names: his son-in-law Jared Kushner and developer Steve Witkoff as the guys who held the talks. Which, of course, immediately led to the next logical question. Okay, so who exactly were these guys talking to on the Iranian side? And the answer here was confusing, to say the least. Trump said they were dealing with a top person, the leader, while at the same time claiming that much of Iran's leadership had already been wiped out. The reporters then shifted to the strategic heart of this whole thing. What happens to the Strait of Hormuz, the very place that sparked the ultimatum to begin with? His answer was pretty remarkable. He claimed it would be jointly controlled. And when asked by who? Maybe me and the Ayatollah. So what's the big picture takeaway from all this? Well, these events raise some really serious, broader questions, especially around the issue of trust and information. This quote from Gerard Baker over at the Wall Street Journal really sums it up. He argues that this incident created a situation where official statements were being met with just deep skepticism, even when you compare them to what an adversary was saying. Ultimately, this whole episode leaves us with a really fundamental challenge. It forces us all to ask, when you're presented with two official yet completely opposite versions of a critically important global event, how on earth are you supposed to figure out what's true? So, Washington, D.C. is at a total standstill. But, the world, it doesn't stop. And right now, we're watching this bitter fight over domestic spending collide with a rapidly escalating foreign policy crisis. With Congress literally sitting empty, the stakes just could not be higher. We're going to break down exactly how we got to this point and what it really means when your own government is divided, but the drums of war are beating louder and louder. And this isn't just, a holiday break or anything like that. As of Monday, the U.S. House of Representatives is officially adjourned. The chamber is empty. All legislative business has just ground to a halt, right at the moment it seems we need it most. Which, of course, raises the really obvious and pretty concerning question, why? I mean, with government agencies about to shut down and the threat of war getting bigger by the day, why on earth would Congress just go home? That's the puzzle we're here to unpack. All right, so the first piece of this puzzle is a funding dispute that has basically paralyzed the House. And this isn't just about dollars and cents, okay? This is a fight over some fundamental policy, and both sides are dug in deep. Here's the core of the standoff. You've got the Democrats, who are willing to fund the TSA, but they're demanding some very specific reforms to ICE operations, things like preventing agents from operating near polling places. But on the other side, a vocal group of Republicans is refusing any deal unless it includes their broader social policy changes. And they want absolutely no new restrictions on ICE. It's a total legislative brick wall. And here we see a pretty big reason why those negotiations have completely stalled. This social media post from Donald Trump directly ties any government funding to a totally unrelated bill, the Save America Act. A tactic like this really shifts the whole debate away from how the government operates and reframes it as a culture war battle, which just makes any kind of compromise that much harder to find. So, what does all this gridlock actually mean for you, for everyday Americans? Well, this is the reported wait time at Atlanta's airport. Yeah, with TSA agents reportedly not showing up for work because of all the funding uncertainty, the consequences are becoming very real very, very quickly. Okay, let's switch gears to the second major crisis, and you'll see how this all starts to connect. While Congress is stuck on domestic stuff, a really serious military situation is unfolding overseas with Iran. And wow, things are moving incredibly fast. First, U.S. expeditionary units get deployed. Then, what started as whispers turns into credible reports of a potential ground invasion of Iran's key oil hub, Karg Island. And right in the middle of all that, a massive $200 billion request for a war supplemental, that's extra money specifically for a potential conflict. It lands on the speaker's desk. And he's totally silent. The situation is just escalating by the day. Then you get this incredibly stark statement. In an effort to build support for military action, Senator Lindsey Graham compares a potential invasion of Karg Island to Iwo Jima. One of the absolute bloodiest and most brutal battles in all of American military history. And to really understand the weight of that comparison, just look at this number, 6,821. That's how many American lives were lost at the Battle of Iwo Jima. It's a figure that provides some crucial and frankly really sobering context to what the senator is calling for. So you have a domestic standoff and a foreign crisis. But there's a third layer here that's just as critical. The Republican Party itself is deeply, deeply divided on what to do next, especially on this whole issue of war with Iran. Yeah, this is not a unified front, not by a long shot. You've got this powerful group of Republicans, everyone from Lauren Boebert to Marjorie Taylor Greene, openly rebelling against the push for war. And they're not just questioning the strategy, they're calling it things like unacceptable, dark, and catastrophic. This is not a minor disagreement, folks. It's a fundamental split right down the middle of the party. And the criticism is getting intensely personal. Representative Nancy Mace isn't just disagreeing with Senator Graham's policy, she's attacking his entire worldview, accusing him of just callously sending someone else's kids to war. I mean, that's a sign of a party at war with itself. So what's driving all this infighting? Well, this polling data gives us a pretty big clue. According to the source, Trump's economic approval rating with independents is historically low, way worse than his predecessors. That kind of political vulnerability could be forcing some Republicans to really distance themselves from potentially unpopular decisions, like, for example, starting a new war. So all of this, the shutdown threat, the war footing, the infighting, it's now raising a much, much larger and more fundamental question about the separation of powers and the U.S. Constitution itself. Representative Warren Davidson really lays out the ultimate fear here. He's saying if the executive branch decides to start a war of choice without getting explicit permission from Congress, the branch that the Constitution actually gives the power to declare war, that it's not just a political fight anymore. It's a genuine constitutional crisis. And just to make an already complicated situation even more confusing, we seem to be getting completely contradictory signals from the administration about our economic policy toward Iran. I mean, how can the U.S. be on a war footing and also maybe easing sanctions at the same time? It doesn't add up. The messaging is just completely scrambled. On one hand, you have Representative Scott Perry insisting that a war footing will cut off Iran's oil money, period. But at the exact same time, there are reports that the Treasury is considering easing sanctions and that Russia is actively helping Iran get around them anyway. It's almost impossible to tell what the actual policy is. So let's just bring it all together. What we really have here is a government that is paralyzed by three things all crashing into each other: a domestic funding battle, deep fractures within one of the major parties, and this enormous unanswered question of whether or not to go to war. And that leaves us with this final critical question. In a moment of intense crisis, when Congress is shut down and a party is basically at war with itself, who truly holds the authority to make the most monumental decision a nation can possibly face? That's really the question at the heart of this entire saga.